Welcome back, everyone. So we learned about the idea of marginality and how it applied to all decision making. So today we're going to do our very first cut of what in economics we call the theory of the firm. So to remind you, when you look at markets, you've got producers and consumers, and we've looked at the theory of demand, the theory of the consumer. Now we're going to look at the producers in output markets. So just remember, in output markets, the people who sell the stuff are called firms. And we are going to look at how do firms make decisions. So the first thing we have to remember is that every time we produce a theory, before we can do any analysis or graphs, we have to kind of figure out our social context and our social analysis. So we're going to have to answer questions such as, well, before I tell you the theory of the firm, blah, 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 who am I talking about? Am I talking about mom and pop's pizza joint? That's one theory. Am I talking about Amazon? That's another theory, right? So I can't have a one-size-fits-all analysis. So in order for me to do good analysis, what I need to do is to start by giving you the environment that I'm assuming firms operate in. And in our story, just to start with, we know it is not the story for every firm, and we're going to moderate the story as we go on. We're going to start with the perfectly competitive firm. This is an interesting firm. It's small. It's so small that it's not actually in a position to have any major direct influence on consumers or prices. It produces its stuff. It's a teeny-weeny firm, and then it sells the stuff. And as a result, it is a perfectly competitive firm which means it is a price taker. It does not get to set the price. Just like when I walk into Rite Aid and I just accept the price of milk, I don't sit and haggle with the Rite Aid lady saying, let me pay you $50 less. In the same way, whoever these people who sell the milk are, they show up. So when you go to the farmer's market or wherever, they show up. They've got pricing. That's the price. They have to accept the price they find in the market. Right? So the idea is, just like consumers, firms are also price takers. That's the first assumption. Second, firms usually are not engaging in competition around branding, around advertising, marketing, around consumer preferences, market share. They don't have the capacity to do that because there is free entry and exit. Anybody who can sell this product at this price can show up. And this happens, right? So when I drive my car, there is a farm stand. And then of late, I've noticed there are now 5 farm stands. Every time I drive by, nobody can stop them. And, you know, there's free entry and exit. Anybody can show up with their basket of cherries and say, so much for Rainier cherries. Right? Anybody can come. If you can't sell your cherries, anybody can leave. So what you're doing is you're a price taker. You got free entry and exit. And that means that the only competition is that who can manage to sell their stuff at the going price and make a profit. That's it. So that set of assumptions is both going to give us the context within which firms operate, And that's the context within which we decide markets are efficient. So just remember, if this is not true, a lot of the things people tell you about efficient markets aren't true. But also, this is the context within which the firm is operating, which means that when I talk about the firm's profit maximization, I'm saying that, if I'm a firm where I've got a ton of monopoly power and I can make a change in how consumers behave and I can advertise, I might actually approach profit maximization differently. And when we come to the theories of monopolies and oligopolies, we'll see how that works. But, to start with, the average firm essentially has to figure out how to produce, sell, and make a profit in this environment as a price taker with free entry and exit among millions, thousands, hundreds, whatever, of other firms. Continuing with that idea of the firm in a perfectly competitive market, let's just take a look at a firm as a price taker. One of the most interesting elements of the firm, the individual firm, not the whole market, just the individual firm, as a price taker, is that whether you're in or out of equilibrium is not the key. Remember, we're just looking at decisions. You're just responding to price. That's all you're responding to. In or out of equilibrium, you're just looking at the price. A firm will take a look at the price of a good. So let's say that the price of apples is $2 per apple. Then that means that the total revenue you get from apples is equal to $2 multiplied by the quantity of apples you try and sell. And because you're a price taker in a perfectly competitive market, you are assuming you just take the price, you show up and sell how much you can. If you feel that you'll make a profit on 3 apples, you will sell 3 apples. If you feel you'll make a profit on 5 apples, you will sell 5 apples. That's what you're doing, right? So the revenue depends on the price multiplied by the quantity. That's all. And this is kind of crucial, has nothing to do with equilibrium. You're just a price taker. It is whatever is given to you from the market. So the only decision that's going to be relevant to you as a price taker is this one. You can't do anything about the price. You can. So, when you say firm will sell for more or less, you are actually not imagining competitive markets. So when you say things like markets are efficient because firms will sell for more money, you are imagining markets are not competitive, which means markets aren't efficient. For a price-taking firm, your core decision is actually just what can you sell? What is the quantity? And you're just going to assume you can sell whatever you produce because you're a price taker. Your focus is on how much should I produce. So it's an oddly narrow decision. So it might seem strange to think that all you look at is the quantity, you don't even focus on the price. But I work on trade. And I have to tell you, I have spoken when you think of some of these biggest areas like garments or electronics, right? So think about, like, I've been active with students who've been working in Students Against Sweatshops. And you're thinking of the big companies like Nike and so on, right? But Nike actually doesn't produce Nike shoes. Who produces Nike shoes? Thousands of small subcontractors who don't actually have tons of say on the price Nike will give them. They accept that price and then they figure out how much they can produce and sell. Nike, it's an interesting situation in the supply chain where, because of, we'll talk about this idea of monopsony power, where it is the purchaser who controls markets. Or in clothing, lots of clothing subcontracts for a lot of these stores, Bloomingdale's, JCPenney, all of these brands, they subcontract India, China, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Mexico, El Salvador, Philippines. In each of these places, you've got tons of small contractors. They don't have a ton of say, maybe a cent here or there, maybe 10 cents here or there. They don't have a ton of say in what that price should be. So what they focus on is whatever price they get, how much can they sell and still make a profit, right? So it's interesting to remember that price competition in terms of being a price maker is usually not so efficient, and that's big firms. But the idea of efficient markets when you're a price taker and you're a small firm is actually not as strange as you may think. It operates in large parts of the world. Lots of people produce and then they just sell to whoever is in the supply chain. They accept the price, they sell the quantity they can, right? So for an ordinary firm, the revenue you get is just whatever your price is times your quantity. So now let's just take a look at your average revenue, AR, and that's just total revenue divided by quantity, right? So if I sold 50 units at $2 a unit, on average, I'm getting $2 a unit. Interestingly enough, that is price. And curiously, marginal, not just average, but marginal revenue. Is also just the same thing as a price, because you're a price taker. Every extra unit you can sell, you will get that price. That's it. What is the revenue of the next unit? It is that $2. First apple gives you $2. Second apple gives you $2. Fifth apple gives you $2, because you are a price taker. Now, it turns out when we come back to some of the examples we've talked about, places where you've got monopoly power, electrification, right? Average revenue and marginal revenue will not be the same, because price makers can change that price with the quantity. Price makers do not operate in competitive markets. Right? So Amazon can actually change that price. This is going to result in a divergence between average and marginal for Amazon. It's going to change its whole profit matrix. But for most small producers, the producer Smith had in mind when he talked about the wealth of nations, and he talked about the local butcher. Smith didn't talk about like the local millionaire, right? He talked about the local butcher, the local baker, your mom and pop store, your corner store. Many of you come from families that own businesses. They're small businesses. But, you might be producing things that are subcontracted to big people, but you yourself are small businesses, right? That is the world that is being described here. And it's not a bad world to describe. It's a really important world. And this idea of marginal revenue equal to price means that when we look at profit maximization, in this specific case, we are going to look at the price of the good as the key variable we will pay attention to in relation to our costs, because that's the marginal thing. When we come to monopolies and other people, we're going to look at a few other things.